Well, today, what I'm going to look at today is Isaac. Now, Isaac covers 4 chapters in the book of Genesis. And some of the things I thought about asking, has anybody ever heard a message about Isaac in all your time at church? Anybody ever talk about Isaac? I don't think so either. And so as I was looking at these 4 chapters, there's some important things here. I didn't want to just pass Isaac up, but there is not the amount of material in Isaac that in my thinking, now I'm not questioning what God does when he writes a book, so, but I couldn't see 4 chapters worth of life in his life. What he accomplished is not like Abraham. Name's not mentioned that many times in the Bible. Jacob and Israel mentioned hundreds of times. Abraham hundreds of times. Moses hundreds of times. Isaac, not very much. Does anybody remember anything about Isaac? Can you think of anything about Isaac?
The only son of Abraham and born late in his life.
Yes.
And he was the one that God told him to sacrifice.
Right.
He didn't have to, because he prepared the calf or the goat or whatever for him.
And we normally tell that story out of Abraham in Genesis 22, when God tested Abraham, or some translations tempted Abraham. And so the 2 words tempted and tested, they're the same word. And so we're all going to be tempted and tested. So to take a look at Isaac, we will begin in Genesis 26. And I'll just run through these chapters real quick. 25, really, actually. We'll start in 26. Do you remember that Isaac was about 40? Brenda brought this. I read over it real quick. It's a story of from a Jewish perspective, I suppose, about Jacob and about Isaac. But he was about 40-something when he wasn't married, and so his dad said, Dad said, Sarah was already dead, I want you to go. He got his servant, his chief servant, of all his material. Abraham, was a very wealthy man, had a lot of people working for him. And so this was the CEO of the company, I guess you might call it. I don't know what you'd call him, but he was the main man. And he said, I want you to go get a wife for Isaac, but I don't want you to get a wife among the Canaanites here. Now, you remember why we decided that they were not going to get a wife from Canaanites? Very important point, or an important point. Maybe not.
Because they worshiped idols, right?
Right. That was one of the reasons. But the other reason is that, you remember who the Canaanites' father was? Ham.
Remember that.
Do what now?
We should have remembered that.
Yeah. Now, you read some commentaries, they'll say that Noah was his father, but Noah was he was his grandson. Canaan was his grandson. And we don't necessarily want to go back into the reasons of how that all came about, because the incest with his mother and Ham. And then God put a curse on Canaan and all his relatives. And remember, I read that long list of relatives of Canaan. And they all lived in Canaan. And so there was a curse on Canaan. And sometimes I sit there and I think about it. I said, and this is not just my question, other writers that I've looked at, they say, why was the child cursed and not Ham? Mm-hmm. That is a question. But, and I don't exactly know how to get what kind of truth to gain out of this that we see there. When Sarah mentioned to Abraham to go with Hagar and get a son by my chief maid, Hagar was the one that took the brunt of the problem, not Sarah or Abraham. And so there becomes a pattern here where the children then take the brunt of the sin of the parents, which to me doesn't seem fair, but God said, I will visit the sins of the fathers upon the third and fourth generations. I don't even know how to fully unpack all that. That doesn't seem right to me, but that's how God's economy works. I don't know if you've ever had that run through your mind or tried to figure that out, but some of what Merle was talking about is not directly, but kind of indirectly, that children are very, very important. God said, these are my children. I want you to have children for me. They're mine. And so it's very important. It's a critical issue here. But anyway, it's obvious that Abraham knew that Canaan was cursed. And he said, so do not bring anybody back. Don't find a bride or a wife from Canaan anymore at all. And whatever you do, don't take my son to back over to my homeland, to Laban. Don't take back over there. I don't want him to leave this place, because God has promised me that this is where me and my descendants are going to live. So you do not take him away, and don't get a wife from him from this area. Now that's found there in Genesis 26 verses 1 through 3. Abraham was old, well advanced in years, and the Lord blessed Abraham in all that he had. He was an extremely wealthy man. So Abraham said to his oldest servant of his house, who ruled over all that he had, please put your hand under my thigh and make a promise to me that you're going to do what I ask you to do. I suppose I could just pass clear over that. Don't need to explain. I couldn't figure that one out at all. You know, I want you to raise your hand and put your hand on the Bible or something. But here he said, put your hand under my thigh and promise me that you're going to do what I tell you to do. Now, that seems strange to me. And so I read around and read a little bit about this, and it gets a little on the edgy side, because once again, we're not talking about making a promise of a promise. We're talking about his descendants, because there's some commentaries that say that put your hand under my thigh. That's not what he was talking about. That's not where he was asking to put his hand. He was asking put his hand on his descendants. What you'd imagine where he was talking about. Now, I said, man, I ought not even talk about that. But what's going on here is that Abraham recognized that he's dealing with his future. He's talking about his future. It's not just finding a good wife for him that'll make a good companion, but we're talking about the future of the promises of God. That's the reason you're supposed to do what I tell you and go over there to my family and find a wife from my relatives over there in the other country, other place. Stay away from Canaan. Stay away from this land. We're not going to have anything to do with this property. Now, I'm sitting there thinking as I've thought about this and worked on this in my mind, trying to figure out exactly how to handle all this, and make it where it's at least a little bit practical for us today. And maybe have a spiritual lesson in this. Because I don't want to just, like we said, just give facts. But what he's talking about is the future. The future. And this is what we read in history. People fight in wars. They said, I'm not fighting for this war. I'm not fighting here. I'm fighting for my children, that they might live free. And a lot of things that we do in wars and things and forming the country is not just for me, but it's for my future, for the future. So whenever we make a decision, we need to somehow or another think about the future. What are we doing for our future? And I've heard a lot of good sermons on people doing things for the future. So what Abraham is doing here, he is applying the promises of God to his future. That's what I see. Now, some of that may have been a little bit new to you. Maybe, I don't know when the last time you read Genesis 26:1 and saw that phrase there and tried to figure out what that meant. But anybody have any comment on that? Has everybody ever thought about, your future? And your future is usually in your children, grandchildren, children on down the line. Do we take care of them? Do we do something that's going to make a difference in their lives in the future? Or is that a new thought? I don't think it's a new thought. It may be a new source of that thought. But most people that go to war, soldiers, I've seen, I'm doing this for the freedom that I'm going to ensure for my family back home. And I gave enough time. If you want to say something, go ahead. Verse 4 says, but you shall go to my country and to my family and take a wife for my son Isaac. Now, it seems to me that back home, Laban and all that crowd, they were producing the women for the wives. that's what they were coming from back there in Laban. But Abraham, verse 6, but Abraham said, beware that you do not take my son back here. Back there. Don't take him back there. And don't take him here. Don't leave him here. Because it's not here, it's not there. So the more I thought about this, or tried to think about an application out of this that's practical for us, is that we need to think about the future. People that are coming after us. That's what I see in this. And then the servant took this and he gathered up 10 camels and a bunch of gold, jewelry, and all kinds of stuff, and headed over. Does anybody remember the sign that the servant asked whoever comes to the right person? This is the sign that I'm going to lay out.
She offered to draw water for him.
Yeah.
Isn't that it?
Yeah. She offered to draw, but he asked that whoever you want me to take back, let her water my camels. Mm-hmm. Does anybody have any idea how much water a camel can drink?
I watched them drink. There's a whole bunch.
They like water.
Best I can understand, what I read, they can drink about 30 gallons of water.
That sounds about right.
And some people say they think they put the water in that hump, but I'm not a camel expert, but what they say is that water doesn't go there. That's just fat to live off the land.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The water goes into the bloodstream. That would run your heart rate up through the roof, pressure. But it goes in their bloodstream. And so so he said, Lord, I'm asking you, this is in verse 12, oh Lord, of my master, please give me success this day and show kindness to my master Abraham. And when I see the person, let them draw water for me and for my camel. Now they say they can drink that much water, what I read, in a very short period of time. It'd take me a long time to drink 30 gallons of water. But they said that camel could drink that much water in about 5 minutes. It said it's a very, very fast drinking water. So, I'm sitting there thinking she's gonna be drawing water half the day. And she's gotta be a pretty strong gal.
Yeah, 'cause water's heavy.
Yeah, it is.
A gallon of water's heavy.
Well, a gallon of water weighs 8 pounds.
Plus you got the cistern to carry it in. They didn't have plastic jugs that were lighter like we do now.
So I don't know if she did this all by herself. It was a time that the ladies came out to draw water. So anyway, she did it. And then he asked her, whose family are you? She said, oh, you're the family I've been looking for. Now, that's a miracle. Nothing short of it. So you see that what God was doing there was also finding the right wife from the right family at the right time, the right place. And it says that she was a very beautiful woman. Now, I don't know what their standard of beauty is back then, but probably was pretty close to our day. But anyway, she was a single virgin that probably 17, 18, 19 years old, somewhere in that neighborhood, my guess. Because they'd be married off before they got too much older. So the man took, after verse 22 said, after they finished drinking, the man took a gold nose ring weighing a half a shekel, 2 bracelets, wrist bracelets, and put it on her. And she, all of a sudden, she became a very wealthy lady real quick. And they took her back. And then the only other major thing that you see this chapter's got 66 verses in it, but it's not that deep theologically unless you sit there and look at it and try to draw things out. It's not the most exciting chapter to read unless you're writing a romance novel or something like that. But anyway, they go back, and the parents, a dowry at that time was important. So here Laban, his family, they wind up with, can we trade 10 camels for Rebecca? And all this gold and everything, we're not gonna take her empty-handed. This was all a dowry that he backed up over to take her. And then they said, let her stay here for a few days so we can celebrate her leaving. And then he said, no, don't do that. I'm ready to go right now. I want to leave real quick. The Lord blessed me here, and so now I want to leave. And they said, well, we're going to ask her. We're going to see if she wants to go. Well, in verse 57, they asked her, said, will you go with this man? And she said, I sure will, right now. I'm out of here. So she left. Now Isaac was out in the field praying, meditating according to the verse. And so this is the first time he saw Rebecca. And it's the first time she saw him. Now, I don't know what you think about arranged marriages, but this marriage was arranged not on earth. This was a heavenly arranged marriage. It was not by accident. It was on purpose. And in verse 67 is something that's not found anywhere else. And then it said, Rebecca became his wife, and he loved her, so Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. Isaac was about 45, so. And this is the first time anywhere in the scripture that a man is mentioned as loving his wife. That's the only other major thing out of some of this that I found. One commentator said that this was the first time that a man ever mentioned that he loved his wife. The others were, you know, I don't know how else to describe it other than it was a business deal. But he actually loved his wife. And he was comforted after his mother's death. Now, we don't necessarily need to go into the next chapter too much. Well, I've got chapters I don't want to. The genealogy. Or did I write the chapters down wrong? I wrote chapters numbers down.
You were in 24 just now.
Yeah, 24. I'm sorry, I was in 24. I wrote the chapters wrong. In chapter 25, she did not have any children. And so Isaac prayed, Lord, please let Rebekah have a child. Now, this is a strange phrase, but I'm sure that in some form or fashion we've all said this in verse 22. So she became pregnant. And it says the children were struggling together within her. Verse 22. And she said, if all is going well with me, why am I having all these problems? That's verse 22, 25, 22. So what did she do? She did exactly what we're supposed to do when we have trouble. She went to inquire of the Lord. Now I'm convinced just about most everything that I can think of that I've had problems with, when I've gone and asked the Lord for help, I've gotten it. It says, if any of you lack wisdom, let them ask God, and he'll give it to you without making you feel ashamed. So she was needing wisdom. She was needing understanding. So sometimes I jump to the New Testament from time to time to show how these things are all the way through the whole Bible. So Psalm 50:15, one of my favorite psalms, says, call upon me in the day of trouble and I'll answer you and you will glorify me. That's my favorite psalm for trouble. Anytime you have trouble, you call upon the Lord, and he said, I will answer you and you will glorify me. So that's exactly what she did. She went and asked God, said, why is all this happening to me? Now, there's several other things that go on in this chapter, in that same verse. You know, when does life begin? Here these twins they started their argument, let's say, real early in life. They were arguing with each other even before they were ever born. And so that really nails it down as to when life begins. Life began here. So, and then God answered her in verse 23. 2 nations are in your womb. 2 peoples shall be separated from your body. 1 people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. Exactly the reverse of the way it's supposed to be. Now later on when we look at Joseph, same thing happened with Joseph. Joseph's sons reversed around. The oldest became master of the younger. This is the same thing here. And indeed there were twins in there. Now verse 27, and I think somebody in here said they bought a book that was talking about the dysfunctional life of some of these.
I did last week.
You did, don't you?
Yeah.
And so this kind of points out a little bit of a dysfunction here in his life, in his family. Isaac loved Esau because of his game. I'm sitting there, what a strange reason to love one of your sons, because he can cook good. I'm sitting there trying to figure this out.
And he had red hair.
Huh?
And he had red hair, is what
Oh, yeah, he was
Yeah.
born redhead. I told my wife what I said in here a few months ago when we were looking at Edom, and she said, "Don't ever say that again." I said, when Esau came out, she said, "Look, I got orangutan." You know. Twisted mind.
Only you, right?
So at any rate, he loved him, but Rebekah loved Jacob. So what? Maybe you were the victim of it, or maybe you've seen families where the father was more inclined towards one child and the mother towards the other child. You can imagine what kind of conflict that would have in a home at the very beginning. Now, I don't know what would cause that. I told my wife the other day, I said, I haven't figured this one out. There's a lot of things I can't figure out right away. I know there's something there, but I can't get my hands on it. Whenever we get down to the next few verses, when Esau sells his birthright, they're coming back from hunting, and Jacob was cooking some stew, some red stew, and Esau had been out hunting, and he was really hungry. And he asked Jacob, said, "Give me some of that food. I'm really starved. Give me some food." Now, if you were a compassionate brother, what would you do?
Met him at the door of the bowl.
I'd give him a little bit of food. But now we begin to understand who Jacob is.
Mm-hmm.
If you're around Jacob, you better really hold on to your billfold. I mean, you better not let it loose. You're talking about salesman. This is birthright. I like this now, Dad. Said, "I'll sell it to you." And Esau said something very dumb, I thought. I mean, if he's got a bow and arrow and a knife and a sword and everything, I'd just take it, That may say something bad about me, but
Put the knife on him.
Yeah.
If you get real hungry, you'll steal something, take something. But at any rate, he sold it to him, which I don't understand. Now, later on in the scripture, we find out that he despised his birthright, and he sought it with tears, but he couldn't get it. He sought it with tears, but he couldn't get it. Now, birthright is something that comes from God. God put all this together, these arrangements. And if you despise, I'm not talking about losing your salvation, but if you, sometimes you make a decision, you're going to have to live with that decision a long time. You're not going to get that decision back. So, kind of a play on, not a play, but a reminding. I never finish a sermon. I've already reworked one Sunday about 2 or 3 times. But it says that Mary made a wise decision. Or as the old movie said, she chose wisely. And Esau chose poorly. But no doubt he made a bad decision. That affected the rest of his entire life. Everything was there. It seemed like, he could go for a little while longer without eating. I don't know how close he was to home, but if he got home, his mama would feed him something. They always have something, maybe a piece of bread around the house or something. It made it sound like Jacob never left home. So they weren't too far away. So anyway, the takeaway from here is be careful about the decisions that you made. So he sold it. Now, I don't think he was about to die. Have you ever said, "I'm dying of hunger"?
Mm-hmm.
But he's not. You can still go on several days without eating. you know,
They used to wait, starve them to death.
how do I know?
I said when they're nursing homes, they used to wait.
Wait,
When you can't eat.
well, Jesus went 40 days, you know, and I've
Well,
seen
none of
people
us
go
are
a long
that.
time.
None of us are that. We're not perfect.
Yeah, but at any rate, so there he went. And now, I'm gonna go ahead and jump to the New Testament to give you something. This is a real thorny passage. I'm gonna jump to the New Testament. Does anybody else remember anything else about Jacob and Esau in the Bible? It's a real thorny passage. One of the most difficult to get your hands around. It's mentioned in Malachi 1, 2, and 3, and Romans 9, 10 through 13. It said, I have loved you, said the Lord. Is that the refrigerator? Okay. Yet I say to you, in which way have I loved you? Esau have I hated, but Jacob I've loved. Jacob I've loved, but verse 3 of Malachi 1, Esau I've loved. And then it's repeated again in Romans 9, probably a little easier to find than Malachi. Romans 9, 10 through 13 has a couple of other things in it. It said, not only this, but when Rebekah also conceived, now Paul adds this, by one man. Now, a lot of women have a couple of children by different people, different men. But Paul made a real emphasis in this point to say that she had twins. She was conceived by two different people by one man. That's not unusual. But sometimes I wonder, why in the world did he put that in? He wanted to make sure that Isaac was the father of both these guys. Which is another thing I'm sitting here thinking about. What is the significance of that? Other than they had the same DNA of their father and mother, both men did. But at any rate, for the children not yet being born, nor having done any good or evil, that the purpose of God according to election might stand, not of works, but of him who calls, it was said to her, the older shall serve the younger. As it is written, Jacob I have loved, but Esau I have hated. Now that gives a lot of trouble to a lot of people. Why would God hate somebody before they're even born? And why would God love somebody? Well, he loves everybody before they're born. I like what J. Vernon McGee said. He said, I don't have any trouble understanding why God hated Esau. I have trouble why God loved Jacob. That's where I have my problems. Not that God did not like Esau. Now, I know I'm jumping off into deep water trying to figure all this out, but the word hate in the New Testament means actually to love less, not to hate. Because you remember in Leah and Rachel? Yeah. It says he loved Leah more than Rachel. But he also says he hated. He didn't say he hate, but he said the hate that he has. So the word love hate means to love less. I'll get it right in a minute. It means to love less. Now you remember Jesus said, if anybody does not come after me, let him hate his father and mother and brothers and sisters and wife, and even his own life, and come after me, or you cannot be my disciple. So we'd have a lot of round and round discussions when I was in in church. What is it? Why does God want us to hate our mother and brother and father and mother, sister and wife? Why do we hate all these folks? Well, he's not talking about hating. He's talking about making sure that you love God more. There's every once in a while somebody will make a bad decision because they want to please their relative and not Jesus. So he's always making the point that you love God more than you love anybody else. And we find this in the life of Jesus. on several places. You remember when they were at the wedding feast and Mary, Jesus' mother, came up and said they don't have any more wine. I want you to straighten this out. And very politely, but very firmly, almost bluntly, Jesus said, you don't tell me what to do. Nobody, even my own family, is going to be telling me how to handle my ministry. Yeah, I'm in charge, and I do what God tells me. I don't do what anybody else says. And so in that sense, God was number one. So it constantly comes back. Who is number one? Genesis, Leah was hated by Jacob compared to Rachel. And then that verse, if any man comes after me, let him hate his father and mother and wife and children and follow me. He cannot be my disciple. Basically what he's saying is love God more than everybody else. Now, there is an element of foreknowledge. Now, I'm not going to go to the direction of predestination here, but I will go to foreknowledge. God knew what Jacob and Esau were going to do. He knew how Esau was going to sell his birthright. He didn't catch him by surprise. He knew that. Now, did he plan it? No, I don't think he planned it. I don't think he wanted it to happen. I was reading in Ezekiel, I'm going through in Ezekiel, and God says in Ezekiel, I have no pleasure in the death of the wicked. I want everybody to be saved. I want everybody to come to know me. And I don't want anybody to be lost. But does God know who's going to say yes and who's going to say no? I believe he does. I believe he knows it. And knowing it brought some of this to bear, where he said, I love Jacob more than Esau because I know Jacob is going to do what I want to do. Now, I've wrestled with this for knowing that I was going to hit Jacob here several weeks ago. And I said, Lord, how in the world am I going to handle this? I didn't want to just pass over it. I just didn't want to just skip over Isaac. He said he's the middle child. There's nothing outstanding about him in my thinking. It's not the doctrinal passages that we get in Abraham or Jacob. But 4 chapters were given to him, so evidently God wants us to learn something from him. So, and I would ask your opinion on that. Do you think it was worth the study of Esau?
I always think of Isaac.
Isaac.
Kind of like the little prince, he was the golden child. Sometimes when you read about family dynamics, there's the golden child, and then there's the dependable child, and then there's the scapegoat. And I always thought of him as being the little prince. He could do no wrong. He had the Nintendo, he had the new car, he had all the stuff. And then somebody had to go out and find him a wife. I don't know about that.
But I think you hit it pretty much on the head. That he was just a necessary person to go the next generation.
Yep.
But there is 4 chapters given to him. There are 4 chapters. Well, I hope we picked up something from Isaac.
Sounds like Esau got a bum rap.
So I think that sometimes too.
Because he wasn't really that bad.
No. Wasn't that bad, but he made bad decisions.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's true.
yeah, it's like his
I
birthright.
always wonder about the relationship with the parents, since they
Mhm.
each favored one over the other.
Yeah.
It seems like that would have caused a lot of conflict.
Probably had separate bedrooms.
It's always interesting to hear siblings as adults talk about the family dynamics from when they were children or teenagers. I mean, I was the oldest, and I was an only child for 6 years, and then my parents had my brother Lee, and then exactly 25 months later, they had Ed. And I always felt like Ed was the favorite. Ed always felt like Lee was the favorite, and Lee always felt like I was the favorite. And we're all looking at each other like, what did I miss? That I didn't pick up on all this, you know. Now I do think that Lee was my mother's favorite because I do,
No?
because, and that doesn't mean she didn't adore me or Ed. He was a middle child and she had been a middle child, and so she identified more with him. And my father was the youngest of 6, and so I think he identified a lot with Ed because Ed was the youngest one. And Ed could charm the birds out of the trees. And I think Daddy liked that, you know.
Well, our concept of a big family today is 8 or 9 people. That'd be a lot. Back then, it was a tribe.
Mhm.
And so you can imagine the rivalries that would
Oh,
build up.
yeah.
And you had 40, 50 children and 8 wives and all these grandchildren and people like that. That's gonna create an awful lot of sibling rivalry, and that's a natural human thing
Yep.
to deal with. And the Bible shows how to do it wrong several times.
It sure
You're
does.
still running? Is it still running?
Yeah, I can cut it off if you want.
Yeah, let's start over. No, the same thing happened with our 3 boys. I mean, the middle boy had brain tumor, and they always said David was a favorite. He got anything he wanted.
Well, if that wasn't natural, Joseph wouldn't have been an Egyptian.
Yeah. So at any rate, you could
That's
be.
a kind of a stretch, but Joseph ended up being an Egyptian because of sibling rivalry.
That's true.
They were serious enough to sell him into slavery.
Yeah.
Well, when we get there, I can't hardly wait to say this, but I was listening to a preacher the other day about Joseph, and he said, just imagine if he hadn't got that special coat, he never would have wound up in Egypt.
That's
Yeah.
right.
So it all started with him giving that colored coat.
Yeah, I always imagined Joseph as being a little pain in the butt, you know.
Yeah.
And no, I'm serious, because his brothers were a good bit older than him, and they were grown men, and they were doing, you know, and here's Joseph and Benjamin. Now, we don't know much about Benjamin, but Joseph, you know, hey, I got this coat, you know. And
Well, he was also a childhood genius. He had to be, because when he ended up in Egypt, they promoted him all the way up to Attorney General or whatever
Yeah,
it was.
yeah.
It was
He was real smart. There's no doubt
Secretary
about
of
that.
State, wasn't that the title?
Pretty much.
Pretty close.
Second in command of the whole country.
Yeah, I think he was basically their Secretary of State.
Yeah.
So that's pretty smart. He had to be clever to work his way up from slave to.
Well, he was an Ashkenazi Jew,
You
so
had to do a lot of kissing.
Mhm.
they were all smart. Smart people make bad decisions.
Ashkenazis are in Europe. He was nowhere close.
Well,
to
he
Europe.
wasn't there yet.
Okay,
Okay.
that's another.
That's another day.
Okay, well, at least we got a good conversation here, and I was nervous about it. Okay, so we do meet next week, right? Yeah, okay. So next week we start Jacob, and I'll take at least 2 weeks to get through Jacob. Now, Jacob is my favorite guy. He's third in line. They renewed the covenant with Isaac, and God renewed it again with Jacob. Okay, Father, thank you for the day. Thank you for our time together. We thank you for your word, and we thank you for Isaac and his whole family. We realize that they had problems just like our families do. And Lord, we ask that you would show us the truths and the lessons that will cause us to understand you better and understand how to live for you better. Amen. The other thing that I'm working on, I don't know if I'm gonna do it or not, but we've been studying the men, but we haven't studied the women yet.
That's right.
No, I've done been through that.
I guess you can probably imagine who my favorite female character is.
Who's that?
It's not Esther, it was Abigail.
Abigail, okay.
Well, you have a daughter that name too.
I know, that's why I named her Abigail.